All right, so let's jump into a world I think most of us would rather, you know, avoid the IRS. I
Yeah,
know. Taxes, not exactly a fun topic, but
right.
believe it or not, there's a fascinating side to the IRS most people just don't see.
Yeah.
We're going behind the scenes, taking a look at how the IRS thinks about your experience as a taxpayer.
Yeah, it's true. The IRS might not be the first organization that pops into your head when you
Wow.
think about customer satisfaction, but
Like, can you
they're
imagine?
very focused on it.
I mean, it's not like they're, competing for our business.
Right.
We can't exactly take our taxes elsewhere.
Yeah,
So why all this effort?
that's a really good question. You see, the IRS has this document, kind of like a blueprint for their customer experience research,
Okay.
and it reveals some pretty interesting insights. For them, customer loyalty isn't about like repeat business.
Yeah.
It's about encouraging compliance.
So a happy taxpayer is more likely to pay their taxes willingly.
Exactly. They're trying to make the experience as smooth and as easy to understand as possible just to increase that voluntary compliance.
Okay.
And that's really where all of this focus on customer experience comes in.
Okay, so that's the big picture. But how do they actually go about, measuring and improving customer experience? I mean, how do you even start?
Well, for starters, they've got like a whole bunch of surveys.
Oh.
Way more than you might think.
Really?
Yeah. They survey everything, like from their automated collection systems
Oh,
to like their appeals process, from innocent spouse relief to, different types of audits. They even survey people who attend their nationwide tax forums.
wow, that's a lot of surveys. What kind of information are they trying to gather from all of this?
Well, their main goal is to gauge taxpayer satisfaction and to pinpoint any issues that people are having.
Yeah.
So, like the survey about the automated collection system,
Yeah,
that might like reveal that people find it like confusing or frustrating to navigate.
right.
And that feedback would then help the IRS streamline the system and make it more user-friendly.
So it sounds like they're really trying to get, into the minds of taxpayers.
They are, and they have to follow some pretty strict guidelines. These are set by the Office of Management and Budget, the OMB,
Okay.
and these rules make sure that the IRS is doing, everything they can to get accurate and reliable data from these surveys.
What kind of rules are we talking about?
Well, one big thing is response rates.
Okay.
The IRS really needs to make sure enough people are responding to their surveys to get like a representative sample.
Right.
Otherwise, the results might be thrown off by something called non-response bias.
That makes sense. If only the angriest taxpayers are responding, they're going to get a pretty negative picture.
Exactly. So the IRS has to be very strategic in how they design their surveys, who they send them to, and
Yeah.
how they encourage people to participate.
All right, so they're gathering all this data through surveys, but what do they actually do with it? I'm picturing, mountains of paperwork collecting dust somewhere.
It's actually quite the opposite.
Right.
The data doesn't just sit around. The IRS actually uses it to improve their processes, their services, even their internal operations.
Okay.
Think of it as a cycle. They collect feedback, analyze the data, and then they use those insights to try to make things better for taxpayers.
So give me an example. How does this actually play out in the real world?
Sure. Let's say their surveys reveal that, taxpayers are consistently confused about a specific tax credit.
Okay.
Armed with that knowledge, they might, redesign the forms or the instructions to make things clearer.
Okay.
They might even, develop targeted outreach campaigns or even create educational materials, explain the credit in simpler terms.
So they're using the data to be proactive
Yeah.
and address taxpayer concerns before they even become major issues.
That's the goal. They're trying to, anticipate any potential problems and just improve the overall taxpayer experience.
Now, the IRS is a massive organization, right? How do they manage to make changes based on all this feedback? Wouldn't that, require a major overhaul?
Well, that's where their modernization efforts come in.
Okay.
The IRS isn't just this one, giant monolith anymore.
Right.
They've restructured their operations into different divisions that are focused on, specific taxpayer groups.
So it's not just one size fits all anymore.
Not at all. They have, specialized divisions for individuals, for small businesses, large corporations, and so on.
Okay.
And this allows them to tailor their approach to customer service and to implement changes based on the unique needs of each group.
So the data they collect from, say, small business owners, for example, might lead to like specific improvements for that group.
Exactly. It's about being more targeted and responsive to the diverse needs of taxpayers.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the IRS is really, concerned with confidentiality, especially when it comes to these surveys.
Right.
How do they make sure people's information is actually protected?
They have very, very strict procedures in place. Okay. Especially when it comes to anything that's sent in alongside those surveys. They call it white mail. And essentially, it's anything that's not a direct response to those survey questions.
So, like, people are sending in their tax returns with the surveys.
It happens.
Really?
And sometimes it's even more sensitive information, like letters detailing tax problems or complaints.
Wow. That sounds like a potential privacy nightmare.
I know, right? But the IRS has this very detailed system for handling all this white mail
Okay.
to ensure that taxpayer privacy is protected.
So how do they do it? What happens to this, like, extra stuff?
Well, it kind of depends on the content.
Okay.
Let's say someone sends in a letter complaining about an IRS employee.
Mm.
Well, that gets flagged right away
Yeah.
and sent to the right people to be addressed.
Okay.
But if someone includes, like, a grocery list or something equally harmless.
They're not analyzing our grocery shopping habits, are they?
No.
Yeah.
Don't worry. They have more important things to focus on. Non-sensitive white mail is documented and securely stored before being disposed of, according to IRS regulations.
Okay. That makes me feel a little better.
Yeah.
So they're collecting data through surveys, carefully handling any extra materials, using that information to improve their processes and services.
Right.
It's a lot more complex than I ever imagined.
Yeah, it is. And honestly, we're just kind of scratching the surface here.
Yeah.
There's a whole world of procedures, guidelines, research, all going on behind the scenes.
Well, I'm definitely intrigued to learn more.
Yeah.
But we'll delve deeper into some of these procedures next time, and we'll see just how the IRS ensures they're getting the most out of all this data.
Exactly.
Stick around.
Yeah.
So before we were talking about how the IRS handles all that extra stuff people send in with their surveys, the so-called white mail.
Right.
I got to say, I'm pretty impressed by how seriously they take confidentiality.
Absolutely. Yeah. They have very, very detailed procedures in place just to make sure that taxpayer privacy is protected, like every step of the way.
Right.
And it's not just lip service either. They really recognize that trust is crucial,
Yeah.
especially when you're dealing with, sensitive financial information.
Makes sense. If people don't feel like their information is safe, they're less likely to be open and honest on those surveys, right?
Exactly. The IRS wants people to feel comfortable sharing their feedback,
Yeah.
even if it's negative, They understand that criticism can be really valuable for identifying areas that need improvement.
Okay, so let's talk about the data itself. They're collecting all this information through surveys and white mail, but how do they actually make sense of it all?
Yeah.
We're talking about like a massive, massive amount of data here.
It's true. The volume of data can be overwhelming, but the IRS doesn't just collect it just for the sake of it.
Right.
They have a whole team dedicated to analyzing and interpreting the results. It's like having their own in-house market research department.
So they're not just looking at the numbers on a spreadsheet.
Not at all. They use a variety of statistical techniques to try to identify, trends, patterns, and areas of concern.
Okay.
And this helps them figure out what's working well and where there's, room for improvement.
So give me an example. How might they use this data to make a tangible difference for taxpayers?
Sure. Let's say their analysis shows that a significant percentage of taxpayers are struggling to understand a particular form
Oh, yeah.
or an instruction. Well, armed with that knowledge, they might redesign the form, simplify the language, maybe even create supplemental materials like videos or FAQs to try to make things clearer.
So instead of just throwing more paperwork at the problem, they're actually trying to streamline the process, make it less confusing.
Exactly, yeah. They're looking for ways to reduce frustration and to make it easier for people to comply with, their tax obligations. Right.
Remember, the IRS's ultimate goal is to increase voluntary compliance.
Yeah. And using data to improve the taxpayer experience is a key part of that strategy.
Absolutely. They recognize that making the process, less painful can actually encourage people to do the right thing.
Now, you mentioned that the IRS has these different divisions that are, focused on specific taxpayer groups. Does that mean they like analyze the data separately for each group?
You bet. It wouldn't make sense to just like lump everyone together.
Right.
Small business owners, they face different challenges than like individuals.
Right.
And large corporations have their own like unique set of concerns.
Right.
So the IRS breaks down the data by group
Okay.
just to make sure they're addressing the, the specific needs of each segment.
So it's like a tailored approach to customer service based on like what type of taxpayer you are.
Exactly. It's a lot more nuanced than just, sending out generic surveys to everyone. Now, I'm curious, are there any, like, limitations to the data that they collect?
Sure.
I mean, surveys in white mail can only tell you so much, right?
Yeah, right. Every research method has, its limitations.
Yeah.
And the IRS recognizes that their surveys might not capture like the full spectrum of taxpayer experiences.
Right.
That's why they're constantly looking for ways to improve, their data collection methods and to explore like new approaches.
So they're not just like resting on their laurels.
Definitely not, no. They're very open to trying new things, seeking out expert advice.
Okay.
In fact, this document we're talking about actually mentions the possibility of using like behavioral economics to better understand how taxpayers make decisions.
Behavioral economics, that sounds pretty high level for the IRS.
It is, but it shows that they're willing to like think outside the box and to embrace, new ideas if it means, improving the taxpayer experience. They understand that people don't always, behave rationally,
right?
Especially when it comes to something as complex as taxes.
So they're trying to get a deeper understanding of like the psychology behind taxpayer behavior.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that there's more to compliance than just providing clear instructions or simplified forms,
Yeah.
It's about understanding the motivations, the biases, even the emotions that influence people's decisions.
It seems like they're really committed to staying on top of their game. Even if it means like venturing into uncharted territory.
They are, yeah. And this commitment to continuous improvement, it extends beyond, data collection and analysis.
Okay.
They also use the insights that they gain to try to improve, their internal operations and the training that they provide to IRS employees.
So it's not just about making things better for taxpayers. It's also about improving the way the IRS functions as an organization.
Absolutely, yeah. They recognize that a more efficient and well-trained workforce that ultimately leads to a better experience for taxpayers.
It's like a never-ending cycle of feedback and analysis and improvement.
You got it. The IRS is constantly collecting data, learning from it, and then, making changes based on those insights.
Yeah.
It's a very dynamic process that requires constant, adaptation and refinement.
It's a far cry from like the image of a static bureaucratic agency that a lot of people have.
It is, yeah. And this deep dive is really revealing a much more, human-centered and forward-thinking side to the IRS.
Well, I'm certainly learning a lot about the inner workings of the IRS, but we'll explore how the IRS shares its findings and what it all means for the future of the taxpayer experience next time.
Right.
We spent this episode exploring a side of the IRS that most people probably don't even think about.
Yeah.
Their quest to make the taxpayer experience actually good.
Right.
And it's been fascinating to learn like how they use data to try to make things, better, make the whole tax process just a little less painful.
It's true, yeah. We often kind of think of the IRS as this like monolithic, unfeeling entity.
Right.
But what we've seen is an organization that's actually, quite focused on understanding and responding to the needs of taxpayers.
Right. And who knew that the IRS was so into data analysis and customer feedback?
Yeah.
But gathering all this information is only, it's only half the battle, right?
Right.
What do they actually do with these insights?
Yeah.
How do they share their findings and make sure that it's actually leading to like real change?
That's a great question. They don't just keep this information, locked away in some vault. The IRS is actually, quite transparent about sharing the results of their research.
Really? So like they're putting out reports on
Yeah.
taxpayers' satisfaction and all
They
that.
are. They produce like these detailed reports that outline, the key findings from their surveys, from the data analysis.
Okay.
And they, include trends and specific recommendations for improvement.
Okay.
And these reports aren't just, for internal use.
But
They're shared with various stakeholders within the IRS,
okay.
as well as like external groups, like
Yeah.
like the IRS Oversight Board.
So it's not just like a self-congratulatory like exercise,
Right.
They're actually being held accountable for using this data
Exactly.
to make things better.
The IRS Oversight Board plays a very, very crucial role in making sure that the IRS is using, taxpayer dollars responsibly and effectively. They review these reports and they hold the IRS accountable for actually implementing those recommended changes.
That's good to know. So it's
Yep.
not just a matter of like, collecting data and patting themselves on the back.
Right.
They're actually expected to like take action.
Exactly. It's a continuous cycle of feedback, analysis, action, and then more feedback.
Right.
They're constantly evaluating their processes and looking for ways to improve.
It's like they're treating taxpayers like actual, customers.
In a way, they are. They recognize that providing, good customer service is essential.
Yeah.
Even in a context where people aren't exactly, thrilled about interacting with them.
Right. It's not like we can choose a different tax agency.
Right, exactly. So the IRS has to work even harder to earn, our trust and cooperation.
It's amazing how this one document has given us like such a different perspective on the IRS. It's like we peeked behind the curtain and saw the inner workings of this, this massive organization.
Yeah, it has been, a very eye-opening experience, and it highlights, I think, the importance of questioning our assumptions. We often like rely on stereotypes or outdated information to form our opinions about, institutions like the IRS.
Yeah, we tend to, focus on those negative stories or like those frustrating experiences that we've all, probably had.
But what we've seen today is that there's another side to the story.
Right.
There are real people at the IRS who are, working hard to make things better for taxpayers.
And they're using data and research to drive those improvements.
Exactly. It's a much more nuanced and complex picture than we might have imagined.
It makes you wonder what other surprising initiatives might be happening like behind the scenes at government agencies.
That's a great question. Maybe it's time for another deep dive.
I've already brainstorming ideas.
Yeah.
Well, we've reached the end of our exploration of the IRS's quest for customer satisfaction. And we hope you've enjoyed this journey.
Yeah.
And maybe you'll learn a thing or two about the IRS that you didn't know before.
And perhaps you'll approach your next tax filing experience with a slightly different perspective.
I know I will. Until next time.